Okay, I just wanted to continue this series of reporting from papers we previously published. This eases the work for people and have a glimpse into a paper without having the effort. And if they want to read the paper later, they can download. So this is a paper published in Global Psychiatry, which is now Global Psychiatry Archives. And it's about football, and I'm just mention this now because we have this World Soccer game. So the question is, in this review, whether football improved mental health or not, and sadly it doesn't. So we made a systematic review on the information, and we get about, just show you here, we get about, look at these methods here. We looked at the papers which are published in Publine, Medline, and the Cumulative Index on Nursing and Allied Mental Health. And we looked for the papers. We looked for papers which looked at different mental health problems, depression, anxiety, and psychosis in people who played soccer. So that was a search. We found quite a few papers, and there were other, when you look to make this search, you have papers in other languages, papers which eventually just mention the word depression, but don't refer to mental health. Other papers were in American football, other papers were in rugby and other sports. So of the 200 papers that focus on football and mental health, 65 focus on trauma, concussions, and neurological consequences. Other focused on imaging, neurobiology, and cognition, but not on core mental health problems such as depression. Some papers focus on very short-term psychological effects of sports performance. Some dealt with alcohol and drug abuse during soccer games and its management. And 6 papers reported on individual major accidents that were related to individual football events and have no bearing on the question. So we had 35 papers remaining. 12 papers were excluded, and they didn't include any quantitative estimates of mental disorders. 6 publications or editorials were about data. So eventually we had 17 papers that were investigated. And the interesting part of this is we have published all these individual papers and summarized. You may have a look at that. There is some strange bias, which is a selection bias, that most papers are on referees and on professional soccer games, soccer players. And what you find then is, and very many in females, relatively many in females, and what you can see, and please look at the individual studies, you have quite a few professional studies, and what you find is that mental health problems are assessed with rating scales and not with interviews, but what you can see is that the increase, there is an increase of mental health problems in the professional soccer players compared to the general population, which to some extent might be related to accidents and their long-term consequences. The other thing is there's some papers, very few papers, who focused on, these are the ones, and it's difficult to see. There are a few ones in amateurs, and there's a paper from Uganda where groups of people had different things to do, and they found that the group who was assessed who eventually managed to be included into playing a soccer game were not better off than the ones who were not taken into a team. So that's one thing. So there's just one paper on amateurs. And there are only 2 studies on spectators. There's nothing on fans, interestingly. So there's something about spectators. And what we've seen is that after a loss of games, their mood was low, and they're in some area, or in one study from Hassanian Mogadam, there was an increase of suicide in the people who had watched the videos, and that was a 2014 World Cup at this time. So in this respect, I have to disappoint, and in studies there isn't much evidence that soccer in general is improving the mental health. People have more accidents if they're professionals, and that can affect their mental health. And losing doesn't really help the mental health. So it seems that the effect of winning and losing is possibly balanced, and on the long term, there's no positive effects, especially if the losses are taken very seriously. There's some, and this is more or less not a part of the study we found in the literature, but there is some evidence and newer evidence, at least qualitative studies, saying that engaging with a soccer team, being part of something, maybe a fan group, might improve the welfare. You might be aware that for mental health, it's very difficult sometimes to get men into engaging with psychiatrists. And in this respect, soccer has been used to engage people into looking at their own mental health and well-being. So in this respect, there seems to be some new work coming up, and I hope this will be evidenced and published in the future. Thanks for your interest. And if you want to read this paper with all the tables, please feel free to look at www.globalpsychiatry.co.uk. And thanks for your interest.